evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
.3 Mahoning Drive-In Radio. Your old friend Virgil back once again for another exciting episode of the podcast. As you guys know, the only podcast dedicated to the love and revival of our beloved drive-in culture. Joined as always by my co-host and general manager extraordinaire, Mark. Say hello, my friend.
I'm saying hello, and I'm also telling the listeners that Virgil did not just have dental work done in his two front teeth. He is coming to us from the road, and his S's are a little sibilant tonight. He was not recently punched in the mouth. It's just an audio anomaly.
Yes, it's true. We're multitasking today. We are en route to try to get the lot beautified before the sun goes down and keeping our schedule of the podcast. But we're really excited for tonight's podcast because it's a friend of the family, and it is also the perfect example of the growth of the Mahoning Drive-In Theater over the last several years. As people know, we've become a fan space beyond, really, movies. We host really any fandom underneath of the sun, and the love of all things retro, all things media, all things collectible seems to be this kind of overarch to what our fans know and what our fans love and have come to love about the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. So some of the beautiful connections, whether it's with the companies that we work with for raffles, whether it's Kodak sponsoring us, whether it's Fangoria getting on board with us, whether it's Pick this year getting on board with us, we are trying to grow this army that supports the Mahoning Drive-In Theater and the movement that we are pushing for every single weekend here and beyond. But one of the perfect connections and examples, again, is our good friend Mike Madrigale, who I knew as Mr. Suit Records out of Lancaster. He had a record shop right there in town, was a staple of the town. And I actually, ironically, met him, I believe, the same weekend that we premiered our documentary at the drive-in at the local theater there, which he actually is fully involved with now, full circle there. But welcome to the show, now Creature Beach Records, formerly Mr. Suit. Mikey Madrigale, welcome, my friend.
Hello, first-time listener, long-time caller. Our cats have decided to play the castanets and sneeze, and so if you're hearing a little craziness in the background, this is our cats acting up for the camera.
We'll take any answers the cats want to give. But you'll have to remind me because your memory might be sharper than mine. Obviously, the shop at that time, I guess we did that screening. It would have been 2017, maybe 2018. Where were you at that time that I met you with the Mr. Suit Records shop?
I bet you we probably had met that night and actually spoke at the Zoetropolis premiere, but I think we had gone to the drive-in earlier. I want to say it was if it wasn't the first Camp Blood, it was very, very early in the Camp Blood run of things. And I'm sure I talked to them a lot there for, 2 seconds as you're doing a million things at once. But I think we can officially say it was at the drive-in premiere.
Yeah, it's you were always the longtime supporter, always having these friendly faces, connections on the lot, people that we always say hello to, whatever it is. And then to have that connect and be like, oh, wait, this is the guy who's doing his thing in town. How did you come to be the record guy in that area? And again, kind of time stamping it. How long was the record shop open when I met you, which I guess would have been, or when I came in there physically, which I guess would have been around 2017 or 18.
So I opened in 2007. So it would have been a good 10 years in.
Yeah.
I remember when the premiere for you guys had for At the Drive-In was at that point, like the second or third Zoetropolis, they've moved again, or they've moved since. And Colleen, my wife, and I are still running First Friday Fright Night, and because of that, they nicely donated the spot for a 10-year anniversary party. I remember even then saying like, hey, so there's this movie called At the Drive-In going to come play soon. You got to come check it out, and talking about the Mahoning band. So it was fairly well established then.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. But as far as the shop, I moved to Lancaster in 2002. I grew up I know you lived in Kempton for a while. I don't know if you were a Kempton guy, but I grew up in Mertztown for quite a while.
No way. Yeah, I lived right on the Leaster Lake Vineyard when I ran the vineyard.
And this is the only podcast in the world you're going to hear someone go, no way, when it comes to positive light.
The connective tissue, right?
Exactly. In being in the Berks County, Lehigh Valley region as a youth, got into records by going to flea markets and the amazing and very lamented Double Decker Records in Allentown, which was 10 minutes from where I went to high school.
Oh, yeah.
Another amazing and thankfully still with us record store in Kutztown called Young Ones that actually I even got to work for off and on. So yeah, that first trip up to the drive-in with me and Colleen and Adam Lenhart, who I know has done some stuff with you guys.
Yeah, we love Adam.
Absolutely. And our friend Britta, back then Pollard, but now her last name is Lipka, driving up and the three of them going, so where are we? And me going like, I know 309 goes to Quakertown. Like I know vaguely where we're at, but I've never been on this road. It was a learning experience for all of us. A beautiful drive though.
It's always an adventure. You know, I always say the Mahoning is not closed for anybody. And I think that's a real sell, is that you're fully removing yourself from your regular environment and immersing yourself in this like cinematic wonderland.
Mm-hmm.
I should make it clear for everybody. We partnered together, gosh, I guess it was 2 seasons ago at this point. At that point, you were closing the shop and you were launching your new project, which is Creature Beach Records. And we were like, we know that you just closed the shop. Is there any opportunity to try to fill our existing record rack, which at that time just had overflow from our collections in it, which we would sell at donation prices, very low. And we said, could we do something legitimate, like bring in actual cool records for people to peruse that aren't just kind of the bottom of the barrel, 50-cent bin leftovers? And you were so receptive to this. And it was one of those things, in addition, that it's hard to remember us not doing it because people love it and embraced it so much so quickly. It's almost like the pinball machine. Like it can never go anywhere because people love it so much. And people look forward to when you load up that rack. But how did this all go down in your memory? And where were you at the time with the shift from brick and mortar shop to, I take it, more online presence?
Well, let's see. Had 15 wonderful years, got to do all sorts of fun stuff while being open. And then COVID happened and I kind of managed to stumble through COVID, but then the triple threat of the economic downturn for what feels like the 90th time since I opened a shop. Yes. My wonderful landlord understandably going, hey, I can't run a building anymore. I have to sell the building. And a new guy buying it and a new guy being like, immediately sending in people to like measure square footage where it's like, okay, that means my rent's going up. If the EV's going up. And then worst of all, my dad unfortunately was diagnosed with leukemia in May of 2021. So these convergence of things that made me go, hey, I'm working 7 days a week and that was great when everything's going well. But when it's kind of not there, it makes you kind of get to a point where it's like, okay, hey, if this was a couple years ago and I was a little more confident about how things are going to play out, I would look into getting a night job or I would do something else to kind of bolster the business, but it's not that. And maybe it's just time for a break. So 15 years, decided to shut it down and avoid having to get like a second mortgage or something horrible like that. And then stuff pops up. Like it felt like, I'm sure there was a time difference, but it felt immediate where it's like, I'm closing the shop. Oh, hey, the Mahoning wants me to bring records up there. I couldn't have had the time and kind of wherewithal to be able to kind of do both things at once.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful. It's like, oh, well, I'm on the right path. All this other fun stuff that I wouldn't have had time to do is now popping up. So yeah, it was just kind of like, hey, Mr. Suit had its run. We're going to, kind of wrap that project up. And again, was still with Colleen and I doing Fright Night and all the stuff we do at Zoetropolis, and also other random record shows in order to fund both music and non-music stuff popping up. We'll kind of think of a different name to kind of call it going forward. And I don't know if you remember, but I had 3 paintings in the front of the shop window, actually by an Allentown artist named Chris P. Jones. And one of them was of the Creature of the Black Lagoon. And that's on stickers that people kind of became to know the place from that monster. So it's like, we've always loved the creature and it's time to party. So what the hell? It's called Creature Beach.
That's just so cool. So perfect. And again, the timing of this all, a lot of things in the Mahoning journey has been destined. And having this happen, obviously the pandemic was a terrible situation, especially for small businesses. But for us, it allowed us to spread our wings and start really thinking about ways that we could build the business now that people were catching on to what we were doing. And again, perfect example of, well, we have this thing, let's utilize it and make it better. And you're the perfect person because just like myself, your life is very much ruled by music and movies. It's very much a clear situation that's where your heart and that's where your passion lie. I know many people on the audience already know, but I grew up on a stage singing since I was a kid professionally, and then shifting, of course, into film later in college. And I was in bands for years, and I liken this story that you're telling about the run at your brick and mortar shop as some of the situations with the bands I was in. Like, it felt like we had the success. We wanted to go out in a way respectfully instead of having it take the downturn and prove that we couldn't hold it together, So it's a real crossover, I think, with that mentality and clearly our personalities and connections just on a friendly level. I think if we didn't hit it off right away on the lot, this connection might not have come as easy. But knowing that you were so supportive, so connected, and so already one of us, it was like, yeah, we got to bring him into the fold.
Well, you look at not to get too punk rock on you guys too quick, but the DIY work ethic, whether it's you guys or Chris Reject from LVAC.
Yes.
There's a thing of no matter kind of what background you're from, outside of the major metropolitan areas of Pennsylvania, you kind of have to make your own fun.
Yeah.
I was going to punk shows in the Allentown area since I was an early teen, and kind of got to see the very beginnings of Chris starting to do his crazy wrestling thing.
Yeah.
And it was the same kind of thing. It's like, wow, this guy, okay, well, I know him from bands X, Y, and Z, but he has a wrestling ring in this like factory? What? So stuff like that. And then it's same thing. It's like, all right, I know where Jim Thorpe is. I went there as a kid and stuff like that. There's a drive-in 10 minutes from it. How come I don't know about it? Where is it? Where's it hiding?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's this kind of thing of you got to make your own fun sometimes. And if you're lucky enough to turn it into a career, you're willing to go to any lengths for it.
Yes.
To a degree and for a certain amount of time. So being in a crazy band and playing basements and sleeping in a van was awesome for a while. In my 20s, there was a certain point, it's like, hey, it's time for the next person's kind of adventure. I'm going to still do the things I love involved with this, but maybe I won't be doing X, Y, and Z to kind of, in the same way that like, well, if I was a little younger, I would have drove DoorDash all night to kind of stop happen. But after, again, a certain time passed, you're like, it's time for somebody else to open up the Kick-Ass record store in Lancaster. So
totally pass the torch. And I totally can relate to this idea of, so I was in bands for years, and I would encourage anybody, a youngster for sure, to try their hand at it because it really pushes this work ethic on you. Like, I feel like the efforts that are mandatory in our regular day-to-day to run our businesses, same thing with Chris, we talked about this. It just kind of, it's in our blood, we are used to going after and pushing and supporting and promoting this thing that is all your heart. Like when you're in a band, that's exactly what it is. Same thing as your project, same thing as Chris's and ours and a lot of the people that we work with. it's passion driven, so it's not a hard crossover. And naturally, we're a magnet for those type of people. We smell our own.
Mm-hmm.
Where did the bug come from? Like, I know for me, it was those early days listening to my father's records, getting into music and really finding my voice, quite literally, to become a child singer. So where's the bug? Like, your location seemed to work out with the record stores and all that, but can we go in the way back machine and give us a little early infant story?
Sure. So parents had an amazing record collection. They were big soul and R&B fans, leaning into jazz, leaning into not as much rock, but all the great 70s and 60s, your Motowns and stuff like that, but also Parliament.
Hell yeah.
All the offshoots of Parliament and James Brown, the Isley Brothers, all this great stuff. And my dad was a carpenter, cabinet maker, but got into that heavily into the antiques business, which is huge in Pennsylvania. So going to Renninger's in Kutztown, going to Jake's in Bardo, going to Kirk Yeomanville, Q Martin, Quaker
The
Telling.
Dig.
Exactly. The Dig. While he was hunting for tools and stuff, and he would say, hey, Dad, I found this whatever record. Oh, pretty neat. Finding records, finding old Monster magazines, finding VHS tapes.
Yes.
Yeah, this was all this stuff that it was just kind of like, it's both the most amazing thing and also, now things are better with the internet and things are a click away, and it takes the mystique away to some degree, but also takes the mystery of you're not totally alone in liking, old kung fu movies, for instance, or something like that.
Yeah, right. Community is a lot easier to find now. Yeah.
They're easy to find, but even again, for the most part, my high school buddies are like, okay, well, my Saturday morning was going to these crazy flea markets or yard sales and getting a pile of records of bands. I don't know who the hell they are, but their record was cover was crazy. I also bought this movie, the VHS tape, Donald Pleasance is in it. I don't know what the hell it's about, but it was $1. Yeah, my Saturday's watching whatever crazy movie. Maybe it stinks, maybe it's great, listening to these records. And some of them got into it, and some of them even for guys who would be into, punk or pro wrestling or any kind of subculture was still yeah, I don't know, dude.
You keep experimenting with that stuff.
Exactly. You have fun with your weird little, things. So all that stuff, obviously getting into fanzines when I kind of found out what those were about. A thing I miss dearly that kind of hasn't stuck around, though, in Allentown off of the main kind of Hamilton Street drag, there is a bunch of, I guess you would consider them pawn shops, but I don't even remember them having names. And they just kind of had kind of everything. So while so-and-so is going in there to buy a new dryer or tools because they're a contractor, they also have boxes of stuff you can kind of sift through. And that's where I got so many, again, VHS tapes, underground comics, fanzines, monster magazines, records from guys who, I guess they ran the place, but there was a bunch of them. And that was always a fun kind of excursion too, because it was if you look at Merchtown on a map, I don't even think we had a stoplight. There might be one there now.
Yeah.
And they moved to a slightly bigger rural area when I was in high school. That got me to the city, that and punk rock shows. I'm just all right, well, I got to learn how to be street smart, more or less. But there was a bunch of places like that in Allentown where I don't know if there's exactly an equivalent of them today that wouldn't be something like an antique mall where things are very well identified and marked and priced, sometimes not accordingly, but very well researched and stuff. Whereas with these places,
there's a real shift. You used to be able to score a lot more. Now people are very on top of, give me a minute. Let me look that up.
Exactly.
Well, I felt so lucky in my youth getting into all this retro media, which at the time was probably 20 plus years old, 60s, 70s stuff. And it was flea markets that were just, people would have a booth and they would have a pile of records and they'd be $1. Or they'd have a pile of old Mad magazines and they'd be $0.25.
They thought it was dead. They were like, why
cheap.
Are we saving this?
Nobody wants this crap, but if somebody will pay me a pittance for it, I'll take it. And I just amassed a ridiculous collection of everything in that era. And it unfortunately set in my mind the price that things should be for old things in my head. So now when I see what everything is priced at, I'm always just but but it's it was nice when it was.
It was $1 before.
Yeah,
No, it's
yeah.
addicting. That dig has chased me, literally chased me, and I'm sure you guys are in that same boat. There is nothing more thrilling than digging through a box and finding that gem that you didn't know existed, and putting it in or playing it and finding your new favorite thing. It truly inspires what we do, and yeah, I'm sure that's the case with you. It sounds like that was your childhood.
Mm-hmm. And my adulthood, for better or for worse. You guys touched it on it wonderfully in the VHS Fest episode too, of just like with collector culture, an upside is that if you want to buy a reissue of the crazy obscure record, that, I mean, if you found it, that would be one thing, and then paying for it's another. If you just want to drop $25 and get a perfectly fine sounding reissue of the crazy 70s funk record, or this whacked out acid rock folk record that somebody, made 200 copies of from in the 60s.
Yes.
You can do that in the same way you can, if you want to buy a Blu-ray reissue of whatever, Blood Cult or Sledgehammer or one of the crazy, that is there if you just want the actual thing. If you do want to hunt down the crazy rare record, the original version of it, or the big box VHS, that is, that's your prerogative, but it's not just, hey, I want to see this movie. My only avenue is to find it, A, and then B, pay out the ass for it. So that is one thing that is the options like, hey, man, I just want to hear the record and have it in my collection. I don't mind a reissue. I just want to watch this crazy movie. I'll listen to it with commentary on my buying the Blu-ray. So that's an upside of stuff with collectibles, at least today. There's multiple avenues.
I'm so curious because I know that my tastes have shifted over time with just what I'm influenced in life and where I'm kind of shifting with my tastes. And some things do stand the test of time. I always say I'm unapologetic about my love of bubblegum 90s rap, but I'm curious about where somebody who runs a record store, which is reliant upon the knowledge of almost every single genre underneath of the sun. I know that was the case with my most recent local shop, the Vinyl Closet. It's a part of the appeal is that owner or that person behind the counter kind of being informed and knowing that when you hold up that record, they can give you a little bit of input on it. But where does your knowledge kind of come from? I mean, I guess naturally over the years, just being immersed in it, but where does your collecting kind of fall? Like, what do you personally get into and go after with that when it comes across your plate?
When I had the shop, I never wanted to be the guy who has the shop who anything awesome that comes.
Totally.
There's a shop down the street. Well, we'll go deep record collector talk. There's a shop down the street that's been there for forever. The guy who owns it is in Lancaster. There is a guy who owns it is super nice, but he's one of those dudes. He has to have 4 copies of everything.
Yes.
So one time I came in to, I forget what, get sleeves or something like that, and we're shooting the shit. And he's like, "Hey, are you into this stuff? The krautrock? It's Pan and Kraftwerk and Amundul and all these other." I'm like, "Yeah, it's stuff." So he's like, "I don't really like it. I'm more of a prog guy. This stuff's a little more out there." But I bought a record cabinet off of somebody, and they said, "Well, the records come with it, and there's 300 of these krautrock records." And he's like listing them off and showing them to me, and it's like the gourmet meal of krautrock, if you're into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at going, well, just besides the fact that this is probably $1,500 worth of records right here, like this, you came across this stuff complete in one shot. It's like getting the first 100 issues of Spider-Man or something like that. Like this is
handed to you. Totally. Yeah.
I'm like, this is awesome. Like, you're going to have an amazing week. He's like, "Well, I'm not selling it." Like, and he even said, like, I'm not really into this thing, but it's like, I don't have it. And this is valuable. So it's going to stick with me. And it was like, you could watch tears running down everyone's eyes going like, "But I would like to buy that off." So I never, ever, ever wanted to be that guy. So the stuff I bought when I had the shop was either really beat copies of something I would want to go, "Hey, I can throw in my 50-cent bin, or I can hold on to this." And then just new releases as they came out, I would just kind of buy an extra one for myself. But for the most part, anything used came in, it was always like, I'll get the next one. So now I'm getting to, we're still going to record stores in the area, and even when we're out like on trips and stuff like that. And it's like, cool, I can kind of look for me now. So have always been into obviously punk, but also the subset of garage rock from the 60s to honestly now. So it's always fun. We were in DC a couple weeks ago. We got to go to this amazing place called Some Records, SOM. It's almost it is a basement. I want to say it's almost in the basement. But, a hole in the wall in DC, but like Kid Congo from the Cramps used to work there and stuff. And you go in there and there's always amazing framed, like Discord era DC hardcore posters, but also like concert posters of like Trouble Funk and all the great like go-go funk bands from the 80s.
Yeah.
So there I got a couple singles by this band called Girl Trouble, who's this long-running Northwestern garage rock band who are great. And took a chance. There was like some bands like, all right, I don't know, it's some 80s punk band. I don't know who they are, but they're from Akron. And Akron has this, whether it's Devo or the Cramps initially, or the Electric Eels, or all these other kind of like proto-punk bands that are really kind of out there and have this really interesting kind of flavor to them. It's like, all right, well, I don't know who these guys are. It's $5. I'm going to give it a shot. So that stuff's always fun. But from day one, I will buy any compilation of like garage, rockabilly, surf, kind of. There's all these great compilations of like rare singles.
Like gold hits and things like that.
That stuff, but then also the super obscure, and a lot of labels picked up on it and in the past couple decades, and you can get anything from what got me into 60s garage rock was this great series called Back from the Grave, that it's, these bands, they were teenagers, they put out 145 and that was it. And there's like 10 volumes of this stuff, it's all killer. And there's all these offshoots of that stuff, that's all great. But then there's also weird, like, well, here's these Cambodian psych rock bands. And it's
I love that stuff, yeah.
And then there's other comps where like, here's weird ass novelty songs. So I have comp after comp of Halloween records where it's like, some DJs made a Halloween record in Triple E Bleeder or something like that. And there's records of this stuff. There's podcasts of this stuff that I could listen to it all day if I felt like it. There's so much of that stuff out there, and it's so wonderful. And it's great.
Well, I mean, again, talking about the inspiration, I mean, you truly were an inspiration, seeing somebody doing their own thing and somebody young, which, really, really is that kind of push, because, I mean, the drive-in culture, the owners of the drive-in culture when we came in very much was an old man's business. Mm-hmm. And us coming in, it was almost like, who are these kids, And at this point, the shift with, Maddie over at Shanks and us here, it's like becoming more of a youthful push and presence for sure. But what gave you the confidence as a young man to be able to be like, I'm going to take this collection, I take it at the time, and start my own business and pop up my own shop? Was there a need and you tried to fill it? How did that all work?
Need and tried to fill it because in Lancaster, luckily, there's always and still is a bunch of record stores in a kind of a cluster area. So again, there is the shop down the street that was great for classic rock stuff. And there is Angry, Young, and Poor, who are now mainly online, but they are the world famous. If anybody in the planet mail orders a Dead Kennedys record, they're buying it from Angry, Young, and Poor. They're amazing. But there wasn't a place to get newer indie rock stuff, but also hip hop records, electronic kind of stuff. And there's a lot of stores that you still go into that are run by an older guy. And I get it to a degree, but it's that if you're 16 and you want to buy a Kendrick Lamar record and you're like, I'm into records, I'm going to go do this. And you go into the record store and the record store is standing in front of a Led Zeppelin poster and says, oh, rap, that's all garbage. Like, and in the same sense, why don't kids your age want to buy records? All I did was call your music garbage.
All I did was discourage you and break your heart.
So there's that kind of thing of like, all right, hey, I'll be the record store that the niche I will fill will be newer stuff that maybe people aren't touching or is just not really their thing. Obviously, I've always carried punk records, but there would be guys who would make a day of it and go to Angry and Poor, buy a bunch of stuff, come see me, buy a bunch of stuff, go to the Chameleon Club, which was the rock club around the corner. They unfortunately didn't make it through COVID, and you could totally make a day of it. Lancaster now is kind of going through this weird phase where a lot of the smaller businesses are closing for the reason small business close. And there's a lot of high rises being built, trying to attract like a retirement age community, which is great. I mean, we love retirement age folks, and Lancaster is very famous for its healthcare. We have all these amazing health campuses. But it then becomes like, okay, but then do retirement age folks, do they want to buy records? Do they want to go see, do they want to go to this dance party at a club down the street? You know, are they going to do something that a 20, 30, even 40-year-old person's going to want to do? So that's kind of the weird shift that's been happening the past couple of years that everyone's doing their best to navigate. But every other week or so, there's a street up Queen Street that was filled with like vintage clothing and antique kind of places. And it's a great kind of, you can, you know, totally spend an afternoon walking down that block. And a couple of those places are closing, and it's a weird, everyone's kind of going, all right, what do you do for fun around here? You know, so.
Right. It's similar in our story in that, you know, we're surrounded by, at the time, the most popular drive-in in Becky's and the most historic drive-in in Shankweiler's. And when we opened, it really was this thing of like, we got to find our voice. We got to find our people. And being supportive, being open, welcoming, all that stuff was a humongous sell for us in growing that community that you guys are a part of, you and your lady. So it really is a crossover. And I can see again why we were drawn to each other.
Well, the beauty of it too, again, VHS Fest, you could say, hey, the movies are secret this year. I'm still going. You know what I mean? Like
it wouldn't matter. It's not about the movies.
And but I mean, what's crazy is I remember seeing Blood Harvest on, I'll date myself here. I actually first heard about Joe Bob Briggs because he had a show on the Movie Channel, which was like the fifth rung past Cinemax and Showtime and stuff like that when I was in high school.
Oh yeah, that's how I first heard of him too. And it always feels weird to acknowledge that he was on the Movie Channel before TNT, because most people they're just like, what? He started on TNT. Well, actually,
sort of. And like his name was kind of around. I would see him kind of referenced in other zines I was getting and stuff like that. But it was like getting that, and it's like, okay, he's showing 3 movies on a Saturday night, and first is something arguably you would know and possibly like, but second and third picks were like, whoa, what dimension did this get fucking beamed from? And one of them was, and it's like, okay, I know who Tiny Tim is because he's like a thing, but like he was in a slasher movie, I don't know about it. And also it's this weird, like kind of a drama about like, you know, farmers, the farm community losing their properties and stuff. Like what? There's nothing else on the planet like this, for better or for worse. So sitting there watching Blood Harvest in the drive-in is like, yeah, I didn't, who would have told 16-year-old me that, yeah, you'll be watching the Blood Harvest in a drive-in 35 years from now with other people who actually know what the hell this movie is. It's pretty crazy.
Let's stick to the current and then we'll jump back into the past again. So you curate what is in the record racks. And for the people listening that are fans of the records and the record rack, you know it is a certain slice for the Mahoning fans. How do you choose? How do you curate? How do you go about bringing in the records and refilling and your choices, if you will?
I'm trying to keep it cheap and fun and weird. So obviously there's soundtracks. Obviously there's your meat and potatoes classic rock stuff. Off the top of my head, I don't think there's often stuff over $10. Most of the stuff's between $1 and $5. And that way there's plenty of stuff in there that is just it's a cool record if you're into it, but also it's a wacky cover. But to get to the point, I don't want to discourage somebody from going, hey, there's a beater copy of the Ghostbusters soundtrack in here for $2. I'm not a record player, but I love Ghostbusters. I want to have this on my shelf kind of thing. And no one, you know, you can have this thing. You're not paying more than is more fun than would be to pay. And everybody's happy. So that's kind of the outlook is like, you know, make them cheap, make them fun. Briefly, so at VHS Fest, went up with my buddy Jared. We get burgers. We sit down outside in those nice little picnic bench kind of thing outside of the concession stand. Sitting across from us is a guy with a Mahoning lanyard who's obviously volunteering. We're talking, and I realize, oh, it's Dave who does American Spook Show. And we've been following each other on Instagram because of the drive-in and stuff like that. And I guess he was volunteering for you guys.
Yeah, Dave Wright. Yep.
Yeah. So he's like, oh, I kind of already know this guy. So we had a wonderful 45 minutes of just kind of shooting the shit in the heat. And him talking about like, yeah, you know, sometimes you want to take a chance on these records for 2 days. It's some kind of weird Moog record, or it's, 101 strings, do the songs of the Ventures or something like that. For $1 or $2, even if it's a dud, you're in on it. You know what I mean? It's if it turns out to be something you don't want, it's not a big deal. And if it is something you want, it's a fun surprise.
That's what we love about it is, again, chasing that dig, chasing that discovery. It's almost like we get to relive that, a couple times throughout the month as you reload the rack, because there's always something eclectic. There's always something cool. And for myself, going back to what do you collect specifically, it's all soundtracks. Like, I am so just in the vein now of, if it's a movie soundtrack and it's connected to a movie, I want to hear it, because I've found so many soundtracks just taking a chance and finding that groove where I'm like, okay, this is my new favorite thing. You know what I mean?
There's a definitely a resurgence in the past, I'll even say 10 years, of these labels. Some of this stuff never, even in the 80s, came out on vinyl, but getting all the horror and cult and exploitation movie soundtracks on vinyl in these really amazing packagings, like Death Waltz and Waxwork. But a bunch of labels, Terror Vision, it's these amazing kind of art objects because it's whatever, the soundtrack to, Bronx Warriors or something like that, but it comes with a poster, it has some crazy liner notes, it can be on a fun color. They're not the cheapest stuff like that, but it's like, again, a lot of the stuff never came out in the first place. So the soundtrack kicks ass, but also you have this crazy, again, this kind of art object you have of like, it's a whole kind of three-dimensional thing that's really been really lovingly designed and stuff like that. It's to a degree almost like if you got your favorite movie on a Criterion Collection.
Totally.
There's all this extra stuff with it. That's so cool.
They've become very good at scratching that collector itch and knowing what the people want, because I'm such a sucker for that. Like, how many times can you buy a movie, but you see, oh, they're adding this element, there's this special feature, I'm getting it again. Just going down the rabbit hole once again. Well, speaking of soundtracks, again, because it falls into my specific wheelhouse, this is going to be the most impossible question. But as you know, we're huge fans of a certain era of films, and movie soundtracks really ruled the world at a certain point. So to ask somebody, what is your favorite soundtrack? It's a very, very hard question. But maybe we can do like a top 5 all-time soundtracks for you, if you have it in you.
Absolutely. I took notes earlier.
Yeah, where does your brain go?
Well, I tried to stick to stuff, soundtracks that were because there's a lot of, you look at like a Tarantino or Wes Anderson, they're making these amazing soundtracks with needle drops from their own collection. And that is totally amazing and stuff like that. But I'm keeping in stuff that's specifically made for the movie. And specifically in that, the soundtrack to Black Caesar by James Brown is like on par, I think, with his best stuff. And he has classic after classic. So that's one that's
gold.
Absolutely. That's one record that was in my parents' collection that, I was listening to that before I even really realized it was a movie. And then years later, like, oh, it's this movie and Larry Cohen directed it, and Fred Williamson's in it, stuff like that. That one, too, if I remember correctly, had this neat kind of, I have a reissue of it, which is a standard jacket, but at least in the 70s, it had kind of like a fold out cover where like the set, there's like a cutout where in the center is drawing of Fred Williamson, and when you open it up, he's punching somebody or something fun.
Hell
like
that. Yeah.
So yeah, that I probably listen to that as much as I listen to Big Payback or Sex Machine or any of the other great James Brown stuff.
Yeah, it's so hard to pick. For me, it's all about where you're at, I think, in the time, I really do agree with you when it comes to I guess you would say, compilation albums versus the score albums. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And for me, like, I would say very tippy top, Once Upon a Time in America and Once Upon a Time in the West. Like, both of those Morricone records are just like home run solid gold. Could listen to them all day long,
Yeah, that's what's fascinating about a lot of those guys is like those composers were, they worked for what felt like 90 years. And especially in Italy, it's like they do the prestige stuff and they do the real down and dirty stuff too. So also on my list for Morricone actually is I know this movie of a million different titles. I think I first saw it as A Fistful of Dynamite, but it's also called Duck You Sucker. And it's a
Yes.
spaghetti western with James Coburn and Rob Steiger. And it's got all the great Morricone touches of weird, like people are singing, but they're not exactly singing words. All the weird kind of super reverbed out twanging guitar. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I go right away. Like, I feel like the reason I've been drawn to soundtracks is when I'm doing work or when I'm writing or when I'm getting creative or in my head. I feel like the score aspect. That's why I think I'm into such like electro synth right now. Is like if something's like a score, it inspires my brain. Once it starts going into lyrics, my brain wants to start singing and getting into lyrics.
Yeah.
But I can say, like, again, perfect timing in my high school years. The Go soundtrack, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie Go.
Yeah.
This soundtrack still lives in my car. Like, it's one of those soundtracks that I would say is the soundtrack to my youth at a certain point. Every single song, even though it is a compilation album, every single song on that album just takes me right back to a time which, as you guys know, can be just as important as whether or not something's quality.
Sure. Well, that was, I mean, think about the soundtrack to Judgment Night was this massive,
Oh,
like,
God,
it's
yeah.
all bands, and that movie is fun, but I mean, it's not, but that was kind of, I think that's the thing with compilation soundtracks like that, in that was specifically like, hey, we're taking all these indie rock bands, and we're taking all the hip hop guys, we're having them make a song together for this soundtrack.
It's almost like a separate marketable thing after the fact.
Yeah, the same thing with like the Crow soundtrack. Whereas a couple after that, especially if you watch like all the mid-aughts horror movies like House of Wax and stuff like that, sounds all have like these all have the same Deftones single. That's also, so it was a kind of a thing of like, hey, again, this is a set project. We're going to specifically have these artists specifically make music for this movie, and it's not stuff that's kind of got left off on the cutting room floor, or it'll be back on their album that's coming out in 6 months, et cetera, et cetera. So
Totally.
yeah, that's the whole it's a kind of thing.
Mark, where does your brain go with like top soundtracks? I know it's an impossible feat.
Well, I was trying to make a list, and it's so hard because I have some that just pop right into my head, and they're usually attached to just like what are my favorite movies, and I love the movie so much, I love the music in it, and then you think about, well, there are the two categories. There are the ones that, like you're talking about, are just like the greatest hits album, like Boogie Nights is a great soundtrack, but it's like a greatest hits of the 70s, and then you have ones that are score, and sometimes it can be a great movie. And this, like, I bought years ago, I found an import on CD of the John Woo Hard Boiled soundtrack when that movie was relatively new. The movie kicks ass. And as you're watching the movie, you're like, this music's great. And then you listen to it, and half the time I'm like, are my speakers on? Is the volume up? Because it's just like, and then it kicks in. And it's like, I could take like an EP distillation of the music that's actually fun to listen to. So like some scores work by themselves, as you said, they're just like a good listen, and some are just like, well, here's every little bit of music in the movie. So I jotted down a few. I'll just run through them fast. Cannonball Run, because it's my favorite movie, and it took me like literally like 30 years to find that album because it only was released in Japan, and everybody was whoever had a copy for sale was like $300.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was always like, I actually enjoy the music. I actually want to listen to it. I don't want to cradle it. I want to just listen to it. I finally did find it eventually on eBay for $50, and I was thrilled. The Casino Royale soundtrack, the original Burton track, which is just a fun listen. And that was another one that when I was growing up, it was always on the wall, because I believe that was one that audiophiles saw as a very good audio quality record, and people were buying it and trading it for that reason. And it wasn't until like 2 years ago I found a copy in Nashville at this insane gigantic media store for like $6, and it was one of those purchases where I was quiet, I was playing it cool, I put it down, they said $6, I paid him $6, and I walked out quickly because I was afraid they were going, no, wait, we left 2 zeros off that. If you know what I'm thinking. Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, just a great classic Morricone soundtrack. I love Morricone. I love the spaghetti westerns. I love Italian films and film music. The Easy Rider soundtrack, as far as like a greatest hits album, is really good, and I love that movie, and it's very evocative of that time and place and ideology. And back to what you started with, the Coffee soundtrack.
Roy Ayers, I think.
Yeah. Coffee soundtrack is just so cool and so badass, and I love that movie. And that was one that I think it was a CD reissue. I ultimately found of that. I've never seen an original LP of that. But I mean, I could go on and on. Like Goblin, I love. So like the Profondo Rosso soundtrack, the Suspiria soundtrack, that stuff is great, evocative standalone listens that I've only ever been able to find on CD. Though they've been reissued in more recent years from, as you said, like Death Waltz and Waxwork and stuff like that. But yeah, I have a very, very deep collection of soundtracks that span like 60s to 90s. And it's a large portion of what I have. And it's a lot of what I often look for when I go to a record store, because to me, like soundtracks and comedy albums are still like a wide open frontier of they made so many for so long for so many obscure movies. And a lot of the stuff you bring through Creature Beach to the Mahoning, I'll look through and I'll pick up these really cool soundtracks to obscure movies. And if I didn't already have it, I would have bought twice the Come Together soundtrack. I'm surprised we still have a copy of that there. Really, it was an Apple Records release. It was one of the few Apple films. It's got like covers of Beatles songs and Tony Anthony on the cover. It's really odd. And that's the kind of stuff that I love seeing you bring in. And I just dive on is this really weird, obscure 60s, 70s soundtrack stuff.
And Apple did, because I forget if they specifically did the Magic Christian, if that was an Apple movie. Obviously, it has Ringo Starr in it.
I think it was an Apple movie, but what was it?
Well, Badfinger.
Commonwealth United? Album?
Yes. Yep.
That's a great soundtrack too. I'm a big Badfinger fan. So like if you want to get a soundtrack with Peter Sellers, flaming it up on Mad About the Boy, and you want to get a bunch of cool Badfinger songs and Something in the Air, I think is on that too.
We're officially at Gilbert Gottfried podcast level of deep cut references that when you're talking.
Well, let them keep up. If they can't keep up, there's more on their way.
That's right, baby. Any others pop to your head, Mike?
Yeah, I'll make these quick. I'm sure I don't want to keep you guys on soundtracks for too long, but the Cannibal Holocaust soundtrack by Riz Ortolani, another guy who made
beautiful soundtrack for an ugly film.
Beautiful soundtrack for an ugly film, always hilarious. So back when the shop would do Record Store Day, which is this whole other thing, a line of people would come in and I would try to find music that could kind of appease everybody. So it gradually became the opening of Cannibal Holocaust. Because every time someone, maybe a little older, would be like, this music's really pleasant. What are you playing? I get to proudly state, I'm playing the soundtrack to Cannibal Holocaust. And everyone was playing.
You want to see the cover?
Exactly. Yeah. So that one, and then in the compilation kind of again slot, the Return of the Living Dead soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
Long thing here. You get the bands on it. You got great songs from a lot of great 80s punk bands, The Damned, Flesh Eaters, later period TSOL, even some weirdo bands like the Tall Boys, who are like an English psychobilly band. But the main Return of the Living Dead theme that plays during the credits of the movie is the best. And then over the years, as Colleen and I are driving up to the drive-in for an event, we pick up the radio station like a mile away or so, and 9 times out of 10, that's what comes on when we turn the radio on. And it like we could rip the doors off the hinges kind of level of pumped of like, we're here, Return of the Living Dead song is playing.
Yes.
The sun's shining, the earth is smiling on all of us. It's tough to beat.
And as we like to point out, our radio station jams a local Christian gospel station. So it really goes from, as I like to say, the word to the weird stuff that we play and the pre-shows, and then the sound of most often screaming and chainsaws for the rest of the night.
Yes. Fantastic. And the other fun thing is usually it's Charlie DJing when we hear too, because like, all right, where's the Mahoning station? Is it Return of the Living Dead? Oh, no, somebody's playing the Headcoats or Electric Frankenstein or like the Mentors. Oh, Charlie's playing records. So
Carl. Yes, Carl. You can always tell. It's a certain taste.
Yeah. He plays great stuff, but a lot of it's that totally in the warehouse of just like, okay, I hear the Super Suckers, so we're close. But I hope someone wanting to hear some choir rendition of some old gospel standard is wondering who, the Mentors are or something like that.
That's always our hope, Well, I don't want to take up all your time. I'm going to pass the mic over to Mark. Mark, you got any questions for our main man, Mike?
Let's get into the relationship that you have had with drive-ins in your life. This being a drive-in podcast, we probably should mention a drive-in on occasion. Did you have drive-in theaters in your youth? Like, what is your history with drive-ins? Any memories of drive-ins?
We did have drive-ins, but I remember seeing so far back, seeing like the Jungle Book as a kid and stuff like that. I'm sure we went to Becky's. I know there was a drive-in in Fleetwood. I'm sure we went to that. Those were in existence, but again, by the time I was a teenager and had a car, it felt like they were all wrapping up or something like that. But interesting, when I was a teenager, there was Joe Bob Briggs, but also I read this book by one of my favorite authors, Joe R. Lansdale, who wrote Bubba Hotep.
Yes.
He wrote a series of books called The Drive-In, and the first one is they go to these Texas young kids go to this drive-in called the Orbit, and they're only showing Texas Chainsaw, Night of the Living Dead, Toolbox Murders, and it's like oh wow, I bet that'd be so cool if there was a drive-in that showed old horror movies. And as another thing of like, as the Mahoning kind of got going, I had to pinch myself and go, like this thing that I wanted dearly in my teens is now actually finally happening. I can go to a drive-in and see Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I don't need a time machine.
Well, that was always the thing for me too, is that I grew up going to drive-ins since I was a kid, and that would have been actually potentially the first movie I ever saw was Saturday Night Fever at a drive-in, which is not a film for a 3-year-old, but the music was great. That's where it took me. So I went through that era, but I was only being taken to the family films and the action films and things like that. So I always yearned for that era that I was not able to exist during, and finding the Mahoning and finding places that did retro drive-in shows. Before the Mahoning, I went to the Riverside Drive-In in Vandergrift for their Monsterama show, and I went to the Pike Drive-In for their Spookaroo shows. And it was exciting to be able to see these movies I'd only ever seen on videotape or TV in their natural habitat, as I like to say. So that's why we all work so hard and fight so hard to keep the Mahoning going, is because we don't want to let this thing go. That, it's one of those things where I say, if I think about all the times I went to a drive-in as a kid, that memory that you're chasing, that experience that you're chasing, I probably have gone 20 times more often in my adulthood than I ever did in my childhood. But you just don't want to let that experience go because it's so rare. If you could program a weekend or a night at the Mahoning, where do your thoughts go as to programming, regardless of whether anybody but you would show up and pay to get in?
It's difficult because you guys have it so kind of nailed down of like, again, VHS Fest could be any movies. I would come see them. I got to make it to Schlockerama one of these years. I was planning on going this past Saturday, but the time didn't line up. And then we found out the lights in our car weren't working. So that was probably good that I didn't get up to...
That's bad for your journey, but that makes you an exemplary customer while at the drive-in.
Very, very much so. But thinking of, and also the Agfa Triple Rippers are always absolute classics.
Yeah.
I was thinking possibly like a Something Weird Video Classics weekend of like Curious Dr. Hump, Ratfinkaboo, stuff like that. But you guys kind of nail that with the Schlockerama. So the other direction I went in is you kind of have to dig for them a little more these days, but contemporary horror movies outside of the big kind of tentpole Terrifier stuff like that, there's a lot of good stuff, and I would love to see, as much as I love the idea of in another 20 years seeing The Thing and Texas Chainsaw still at a drive-in, I would love to see Frankenstein's Army and Dead Snow. They'd be perfect in the drive-in. If you guys know about them, they're, I think, either both German, but they're in the past 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Frankenstein's Army is it's a found footage movie, but it's these World War II soldiers go into this crazy factory filled with the most insane, like, human robot hybrid, but it again takes place during World War II. So there's like guys with like propeller blades in their chest and stuff. It's scary. It's hilarious. It's totally unique. And then this movie Dead Snow, there's a couple of them. They're all great. And it's just these skiers fighting Nazi zombies. And again, they're super fun. They're I don't want to say horror comedy, but in the same way that like the first Evil Dead has these moments of laughter because it's so kind of left field. It has that kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, it's very over the top, gory, kind of crude humor on occasion. I've seen both of those, and I was a big fan of Shockwaves, the 1977 underwater Nazi zombie movie. You could have and there's Oasis of the Zombies. You could have literally a whole weekend of just Nazi zombie films. And
So I can't not interject anymore. You've begun talking about Shockwaves.
I love Shockwaves.
I have the Shockwaves soundtrack on vinyl upstairs, and it is just one of my favorite movie soundtracks of all time.
That's a movie. I saw that on a Saturday afternoon TV on one of the Boston TV stations, where I grew up. And it's one of those movies. It's a thing I love. I call it daylight horror, and not a lot of movies will do it, where it's something terrifying, just right out in the open, and it's going to get you, and you can clearly see it, and it's going to get you, and it's just terrifying. And I found I've got the Blu-ray or the 4K or whatever the latest version of it. Looks great. But I also found the old Prism home video VHS, like the first video release of that. And it looks exactly like it did when I first saw it on TV. And there's something really appealing about being able to see it exactly the way I first saw it. It's so much fun.
Absolutely. Grainy. It makes you feel like the channel you didn't exactly get or doesn't come in totally perfect and stuff like that. It hones into something for sure.
Well, I think the audience is now hearing the beginning of the Pennsylvania chapter of the Shockwaves fan club being formed.
We have to draw the line somewhere, because I remember one time we were looking at all the crazy horror movie T-shirts that you see these days, and it's like, oh, I have my pick of multiple Shockwave shirts, which is rad. However, I remember the first one we came across, it's like, well, there's a swastika on it. Like, I don't know if someone stops me in the street and says, oh my God, why do you have a swastika on your shirt? They're not going to listen to my explanation. Like, well, they're the bad guys. It's like, look, we're just going to. But yeah, Nazi zombie weekend. We'll
Hell yeah. Adding it to the calendar as we speak.
Maybe not a lot of cosplay that weekend. We may just cover down the cosplay.
Whole Zombie Fest day that's just Nazi zombies.
Yep.
Oh, that would totally play. 100%.
Waste the zombies. We'll find a bunch of them.
All day. Well, before we let you go, the Mahoning is all about raising the bar every single year. We always say we baby step with our growth, but I feel like we are taking a huge leap this year. How hard did your brain explode when you saw that we're bringing in Fabio Frizzi?
That is going to be, I missed it in the soundtrack thing, but the Claudio Simonetti Goblin did a live, they came to the Chameleon Club pre-COVID and did live Suspiria, and they did live Deep Red, and both of them, Suspiria especially, top 5 concerts I've ever seen. They play in front of the thing, that you get the full movie, that they're, genius level musicians. After that was a greatest hits set with video clips and stuff. And thinking even then was like, that'd be awesome in a drive-in. I bet they can't do it because of reasons X, Y, and Z. But that show with Zombie, that's going to be one for the books. So I can't wait for that.
Legendary. And it really does have our heads going too. Well, we're raising the bar. This opens up a whole new bag of opportunities for us to bring in some music-related fan-based things and add some icing on a music. It's just very exciting. Well, we thank you endlessly, and obviously, Colleen, for your guys' love and support of the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. But beyond that, you are truly a part of this family and a part of this growth, and we thank you so much for helping us raise that bar.
I'm about to cry right now, because you guys literally have no idea of just like, it was enough for me to just be a patron. The fact I kind of get to be on the team is like life goals for me. But also, I have a business idea to pitch both you guys and your wide world of listeners who hopefully have more money.
Ooh, yeah, let's hear it.
Find a spot in the immediate vicinity. And I'm thinking someone, they're going to need a lot of money and know-how, but just claim a spot, about an acre of land, monster-themed mini golf, and an arcade. Have open during the day. It closes at 6 when the Mahoning gates open. So if you're sleeping over, what better to do all day than head 10 feet over to the mini golf and play Double Dragon and do all this stuff there, and then come back in time for the movies.
Oh, God.
It's funny because in the early days of the Mahoning, there was an attached driving range and batting cages and I think archery place called Fairways. That was like the same people owned it. It was adjacent to the property. And it's that smart idea of get people out there early before you're going to show movies and be making money, monetize the space when you can't be doing what you're there to do. Your idea sounds more fun, though.
Yeah, monster mini golf. I'm in. No need to sell us any further on that.
If you don't to it, I can find you guys arcade games. Designing a golf course is not my wheelhouse. So that's
You know what's so crazy? Gosh, so somebody reached out to us recently, connected to us. I can't remember who it was now, but they were like, "Hey, my friend just closed this punk rock mini golf thing down in Philly. If you guys ever wanted something as a display, we got the connections."
Yeah, there you go.
It's all about laying the foundation. I say all the ideas here start with a little seed. You're just planting it in there, seeing if it grows. Now, whenever I see it, you'll be like, mini golf? Well, thank you guys so much. Endlessly. We love you so much. And we can't wait to see you on the lot because honestly, every time we see you on the lot, you got new records for us. So it's endless excitement.
Yeah, you'll hopefully see us in the next, probably the next week or so. I got another creative stuff ready to go.
Hell yeah. Let people know where they can go to find support. And I take it most of your business is now online. Is there a specific place to go to like peruse the records you have available?
Just Instagram. If you go to Creature Beach Records on Instagram, I post stuff on there every day that if you want me to mail it to you, we can definitely do that. But also once a month, maybe once every other month, we're setting up at a record show. I'll post kind of highlights of stuff I'm taking to the drive-in. But then there's also all the movie stuff. I lucked out when the store closed. I was hired almost immediately at Zoetropolis, which is the art house cinema literally around the corner from where the shop was. Colleen and I have been doing First Friday Fright Night 10 years strong, it feels like. But we're also all sorts of other crazy movie and we did movie trivia last night where we show crazy trailers in between the rounds and stuff. So anything we're doing, just click on the Creature Beach Records and we'll let you know.
Yeah, I gotta say, again, with the endless inspiration and kind of going both ways, feeding each other's fire, when I saw that you made that leap, like almost instantly from when you closed the shop over to working at the theater, it's like, of course, my man can't stop. My man can't stop.
Yeah, I lucked out again. I thought, hey, I'll go work at a coffee shop in a little while. I'll get the cool, fun job. But that's all the people you guys get to work with. Whether it's Joe Bob or Chris Reject or Al, who made the movies, it's like these people kind of come into your orbit and, you have the baseline interests, but also the baseline work ethic. And again, the desire to just, hey, if the drive-in closes tomorrow, who else can say they had, the live score of a zombie playing at their drive-in? You know what I mean?
That's right, baby. One of a kind, raising the bar.
That's just one event, however
Making
many.
waves. Yeah. Well, thank you again. We're going to continue to inspire each other. We're going to continue to make some magic and stay tuned for Monster Mini Golf. Oh, we love you guys so much. And on that note, Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field. And most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night and God bless you.